Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Hombre Cave. I'm your host, the Tequila Hombre. You can call me Mark or Hombre. We're friends now, so we don't have to get so formal. But welcome to this episode of the Hombre Cave. Today we're going to talk about an interesting subject, one that's really I kind of get really super interested in and did a rabbit hole dive down into it, and probably know more about the subject than a lot of people in the industry do because of the extensive research and stuff I've done on this. So I can't wait to share with you what I've learned in regards to the similarities between tequila and wine. Now, you're probably wondering, well, how did you ever think to look about the similarities between tequila and wine? Well, there was a couple of things that really kind of drove me into it. And one of it was in the old days when the Spanish conquistadors took over Mexico and they were making tequila and mezcal and stuff. It was called Vino de Mezcal. So it was called wine of the mezcal. So what we know as tequila today was called Vino de Mezcal de Tequila. So the wine of the mezcal from tequila. So I wondered, why did they call it wine? And then another thing that kind of interested me and said, I need to explore this more, is the fact that terroir, which is huge in wine, right? You always want to look at where the grapes are coming from because it will actually affect the flavor profile of the grapes and the wine. So if it's coming from New Zealand or if it's coming from France or if the grapes are grown in Napa Valley here in California or other areas throughout the United States, the wine will reflect the terroir, which is the soil and the environment in which they're grown. Well, the same exact thing happens with tequila and Weber Blue Agave. There's a terroir aspect to it where in the world of tequila, it's normally considered the valle, the valley, or Los Altos, which is the higher altitude regions of Jalisco. And so the Los Altos region has a different type of soil, more volcanic, red soil. And then the agave, because it's in a higher altitude, gets less water, it gets colder there. And so they fight harder to survive. And that causes a different flavor profile. And depending on where they're grown in the Los Altos region, as well as in the Valle region, it will affect the flavor profile that you get from the tequila. So with terroir and with them being called Vino de Mezcal, I said, there's got to be something going on here where these two alcohols are similar, if not almost identical. And you'd be surprised at what I found. So this episode, we're going to dive down and I'm going to get kind of technical a little bit for you, but give you a lot of great information that will help you understand the similarities between the two. And after I found out the similarities, I actually went back to try red wine. I wasn't a wine drinker before, but because I'm a tequila reviewer and I love tequila, I actually tried red wine again and actually found that I really like it and become a big fan of good red wine. And I attribute that to my tequila experience in drinking tequila. So maybe if you're a wine drinker, the opposite might happen to you and you might want to experiment and take a look at tequila again. Even if you've had bad experiences in the past, we all have, but I can guide you towards what kind of tequilas to look for and what kind of things to do, on this podcast. So don't be afraid to explore tequila, even if it's something that you're like, oh, I had a bad experience with in college. The stuff you drank in college is not the stuff that's available today and the stuff that I could guide you towards. For me, an example of this would be like, saying in college, I drank Thunderbird wine and got drunk and hungover and sick. So, or Mad Dog 2020 and got hungover and sick. So I don't drink wine. It's kind of the same thing, with those that got sick on Jose Cuervo. That's not what really good tequila tastes like. And I can guide you towards that. Or you can check out the Tequila Hombre YouTube channel for recommendations. But we're going to dive now into the similarities between wine. I think you're going to be impressed at the similarities. And hopefully it motivates you to explore this more and maybe become a home winemaker like myself to learn more about tequila production and what you can do to make really amazing tequila. If you ever visit a producer and have an idea for a brand or a project, this knowledge will be fundamental in really producing a top quality tequila. So pour yourself a glass, sit back, and let's get going. All right. So the first aspect that I looked at when looking at the similarities between tequila and wine was the fermentables. How are the fermentables alike? Well, when you look at whiskeys and stuff, whiskeys, when you do mashing and you look at what a whiskey fermentable is like, those are mostly maltose. When you look at wine must typically consist of about 50 or more percent fructose and the rest sucrose. So in order for something really to be considered a wine, it has to be a fermented fruit, right? Fermented fruit makes wine. So I'm looking at it going, well, Weber Blue Agave isn't fruit. It's like a root ball, kind of. It's a source of nutrients above the root ball that is essential in the agave plant reproducing. So it spends its whole life packing these starches into this ball above the roots that will then later provide fuel for growing a quiote, which is a long stem that grows from the middle of the plant up into the sky. And that sprouts seeds, which will then drop in the ground to reproduce. So it spends its whole life gathering these starches in this ball, and then grows the quiote. And typically, before you could go anywhere like up to 15 years before it sprouted the quiote. Things have changed now because the agave have adapted to soil conditions and climate conditions and stuff. And now they're actually hitting maturity at between 5 to 8 years. They're growing the quiote now. So, but all the sugars, it spends its whole life gathering all these starches to provide energy for growing this quiote and the seeds for reproducing. So in order to really get to the sugar, you need to cook these starches and convert them into sugars. And when you cook the starches in this ball above the roots, it converts the starches into fructose. Now, the fructose content of agave must, which they call mosto. So that was one thing that's kind of interesting too. In wine, it's wine must. In tequila, it's mosto, which is must, is what they call the fermentable liquid after they, process the agave properly. So the fermentables in tequila must is 70 to 80% fructose. It's mostly fructose. So that's why a lot of the producers use wine yeast for best results, because the fermentables that the yeast processes is very similar to wine. Now, fructose is the sweetest of the sugars. It's sweeter than sucrose and sweeter than maltose. And it's also a little more difficult for yeast to digest and to process and turn into alcohol and carbon dioxide and heat. That's what happens during fermentation. So because of that, there's always some residual sweetness because the yeast doesn't take all of it. But the fact that the fermentables are so close got me thinking, well, and they use wine yeast, well, what about the processes? How will the processes work out? And it works out that the processes are exactly the same. So you want to use a yeast that works in high fructose environments, which wine yeast does. Now, the pH in wine must and in tequila mosto is also a high acid environment, which other yeasts will not function well in, but wine yeast will. The pHs of agave must and wine must are very similar as well. So here we're looking at two things between wine and tequila that are very similar as far as their fermentables and their must content and sugar content and chemical makeup is. So this really got me kind of excited to explore this even more and see what kind of things are going on between the two. So another thing that was interesting as well is when you look at the other compounds that are involved in both the plants, there's a lot of similarities there as well too. Agave has tannins and terpenes, just as grapes do. Agave also has malic acid, and when they create the must, it'll have malic acid in it. So it'll actually go through malolactic fermentation, just as red wine does, or wine does in general. If you don't stop it with whites, it'll go through a malolactic fermentation, which gives it that buttery, more rounded profile. It's the same with tequila, but they're also both susceptible to the same bacterias. Lactobacillus is one of them that it can infect a must and create off flavors. So one of the things that was really interesting to me is, okay, well, what kind of things can you do to do a clean fermentation in tequila production, just like you do in wine, to stop some of the off flavors and stuff? And see, a lot of people don't know when they taste blancos or they taste tequilas, there's a lot of the distilleries, they don't monitor their fermentation very well. They don't do any temperature control in there at all, period. And so that kind of got me thinking, well, why don't they do more temperature control? But they also do open tank fermentations, and they'll let them go for a while to the point where there's flies landing in them. And so with wine, if you can't do that, because if you have flies and stuff landing in it, you're going to grow bacteria on it, and you're going to watch your wine turn to vinegar quickly. But they don't do a lot of that in tequila. But what I'm finding is that the stuff that you consider off notes or stuff you don't want in wine are often showing up as flavors in tequila. So one of the things that really got me thinking is what kind of processes, what kind of things can we do to kind of duplicate what happens in wine and tequila to produce a cleaner, more agave rich, less off flavors and stuff in tequila. And so I dove into home winemaking to learn about the processes, learn about how to make wine, and see some of the processes so I can take some of these with me to tequila to work with some of the producers on. And so far, some of the stuff I've taken has worked on some of the projects that I've worked on. And I think I've really impressed some of the producers as well, because I've given them some ideas of things that they can do to produce a cleaner flavor profile. And a lot of them have been really open to it, which is great, to experimenting. And so now for me to learn more, I'm not a winemaking expert by any means. I'm diving into it and taking an enology certification course. So I'm going to be certified as a professional winemaker. And so I'm going to take you guys along with me on that as well. So we can all learn together, and you be able to take this directly from winemaking and use it in tequila production up to the distillation part, of course. But the two will meld together nicely, and we'll be able to create some different, interesting flavor profiles, incorporating what I learned from wine and winemaking into the world of tequila. So hopefully you'll keep an eye out for some of the special projects and stuff that I have coming out that will incorporate these, and you'll be able to taste the difference. So next, after I found out all these similarities, I reached out to some people that I know that are producers that have tequila brands and said, hey, do you know about the similarities between wine and tequila? And one of my friends, who was a big wine person, winemaker, wine drinker, lives in Sonoma County in the wine region there, said, look, Mark, I've been trying to tell people about this for years. And I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me about it? I didn't know about this. He goes, well, you just found out now. Congratulations. And then I found out that some of the producers that I really admire and that I really like are wine people. One of them actually on his time when he's not producing tequila, teaches wine to people. He travels the country teaching wine. And he actually did a backpacking trip all through Italy, tasting his way through all the different wine regions of Italy, walking with a backpack, hiking, backpacking through Italy. And then he's also done a wine tour through France. And this is a tequila producer. This is a guy that produces tequila. And so now he's been following my winemaking adventures here in the Hombre Cave. And I actually brought him on the last trip that I just came back from. I brought him a bottle of wine, and he's really looking forward to opening it up and tasting it and giving me his feedback on it, which I'm excited to hear what he thinks. I think the wine turned out really well. So there's a lot of these producers. And then, there's another producer that's with a brand that's become really popular, but he is also a total wine person. He makes wine himself. He's a winemaker. He also is considered a wine expert and is really deep in the world of wine, which shocked me that these highly respected winemakers are also tequila producers and highly respected tequila producers. So it made more sense now as to why these particular producers produce better quality tequila than some of the other producers that have been doing it for multiple generations. So really interesting stuff. And it really kind of blew me away what I was learning. All right. So after finding out about the fermentables and the fact that agave and grapes both have terpenes and both have tannins, and a lot of the makeup in the fermentables and stuff is very similar, if not the same, except for the flavor profiles and stuff like that, right? They taste differently. I said, okay, well, let's look at the plants and see if there's any similarities between the plants. And I was shocked to find out that there are. The Weber Blue Agave is from a different family than wine grapes are, of course. The Weber Blue Agave comes from the asparagus family. So it's more related towards an asparagus, where grapes aren't. But when I wanted to look at the growing conditions and the climate stuff that both of these plants really thrive in. And so Weber Blue Agave thrives in a high altitude environment, and so do grapes. Grapes that are grown in a higher in altitude are considered better quality grapes, and grapes typically do better and produce better fruit at higher altitudes. So that was kind of interesting. And then I wanted to look at soil conditions, where Weber Blue Agave do not like to be in super wet soil. They like soil that's dry, that's sandy, that drains. So there's not a bunch of pooling water. Otherwise, it will get root rot. Same exact thing with grapes, which was like, this is kind of interesting. Grapes do not like to be in standing water. They like it for the water to run off and for the soil to be rocky and more dry. So I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting as well. And then another thing that kind of was interesting to me is the fact that Weber Blue Agave takes 5 years to 8 years before you can harvest it for using for tequila, where grapes are more 3 to 5 years before they'll start producing fruit. And then you get fruit every year from grapes. So it'll produce fruit every year, which is why you have vintages, right? And the fruits from every year is going to be different because of the terroir and because of the climate changes from year to year and the growing conditions from year to year. Weber Blue Agave, that's harvested once, and then you have to replant the field. So that's different in that aspect. But the fact that when you plant grapevines, you have to wait between 3 to 5 years before it'll start producing fruit is similar to the fact that you have to wait at least 5 years to be able to harvest Weber Blue Agave to use for tequila production. So another thing that's kind of interesting and close between wine and tequila. All right, so now let's look at how the two are processed and some of the similarities between the two of them. Well, for Weber Blue Agave, the way they're harvested and what they look for about 24 bricks in Weber Blue Agave before they harvest them. Same with grapes. For red wines. For white wines, you can go less. For red wines, I look for 24 bricks. So that was kind of interesting that when I asked them, I said, well, what kind of sugar content do you look for? And they said 24 bricks. It kind of was like, oh, it's the same with me with red wine. It's a nice similarity. But after you harvest them, let's look at processing, right? So Weber Blue Agave, you need to cook them in order to convert the starches to sugars. Grapes, Mother Nature took care of that for us. So then it's time for fermentation, right? So before fermentation, you have to press the Weber Blue Agave with water to extract the sugars out of the fibers and create the must. Well, when making white wine, same thing. You put the grapes through a crusher destemmer to get the juice and stuff out, and then you press the grapes to get them off the skins, and then you have your fermented white wine must. For red wine, it's a little different, and they can actually do this with tequila as well, and some older style production methods incorporated this. But with Weber Blue Agave, people have experimented with it, modern day, to go back to like the ancestral times, the way they used to make tequila in the old days. You could take the tequila, the mezcal, the Weber Blue Agave, and crush it and just throw it into a tank. So the fibers and stuff are all loose in the tank with some water and fermented that way. By doing that, you'll get a different flavor profile, more complexity to it. You'll get some of the tannins and terpenes and stuff in it as well, which will lend to a different flavor profile than the commercialized stuff that's available today. With grapes, same thing. You run the red wine grapes through a crusher destemmer, or you can do it with white wine too. With white wine, when you do it this method, it creates what's called an orange wine. So you can run through a crusher destemmer, get the juice, and then red wine, you normally will take the juice and the skins and throw them into the fermenter and ferment them together. And that way the wine must will extract color, will extract tannins, will extract terpenes, will extract all kinds of stuff from the skins to give that red wine more complexity and turn it, that beautiful purple color or red color that you look for in a nice red wine. With white wines, if you can run them through a crusher destemmer and ferment them with the skins as well, it'll make an orange wine, which is a white wine with more complex notes, more tannins in it. And it really makes an interesting expression, an interesting white wine. But it's more of an orange color, so it's called an orange wine. I made an orange wine this year, and it's actually phenomenal. I am not a white wine drinker myself, but I really love the flavors that I get from this orange wine because I love the complexity and stuff that the skins give it. So if a tequila maker wanted to add more complexity to their tequila and make it more interesting profile, they could go old school on it and just take the agave that after it comes out of the oven, crush them up with a mallet, throw them into a tank with some water, and ferment them that way. And it would ferment and would make a really nice, interesting tequila. But because things have gotten more commercialized these days, they normally will run them through with a Taona or with a roller mill and extract the sugars first and then ferment that. And that way they're not dealing with the mess of the fibers in the tank. So then after fermentation happens, there's two types of fermentations that will happen in both of them. You'll get your primary alcohol fermentation, and then you'll have a malolactic fermentation that happens in both as well, because malic acid is present in both agave must and wine must. So, but then also the same bacteria and same problems you can have with wine if you don't monitor the fermentation can happen with tequila. Winemakers tend to pay more attention to that because you need to drink the wine must after it's fermented. And tequila, they don't really pay attention to that much because it's distilled. But because there's bacteria, infections, and stuff that happen in the wine, there's some off flavors that will actually be present in the distillate. It won't hurt you. Not like drinking the tequila must would. So most people won't drink the tequila must, but because it can make you sick. But when distilled, it just adds some interesting flavors to it, which should be considered off flavors, but are embraced by a lot of people that drink tequila. So after finding all these similarities between the two, one of the things that I did was kind of thought, well, how can we take some of these processes I'm learning about, in home winemaking and that I'll learn about in my enology certification courses and incorporate them into tequila production to produce better quality tequila. You see, a lot of the producers there are doing things the way their great-grandfather did and their grandfather did and their father did. And the techniques and stuff have been passed down from generation to generation, which is great, keeping the tradition alive. But technology and knowledge has changed where people have experimented, people have researched and come up with different ways to do things to produce better, cleaner flavor profiles. And some of these elements, well, I think need to be explored. But unfortunately, a lot of them don't have the equipment stuff to do so. So one of the things I did with one of the producers, and for those of you that have tried my Still Strength Blanco that I made with Carrera Tequila, this is what we did. We said, let's focus when we do the fermentation on doing it when it's really cold outside. And this will be kind of a way of doing temperature management on it. I wanted to keep the temperature low and not have it get, way up into the 80s during fermentation like it can even into the 90s. During the summer months there in the Los Altos region of Jalisco. Instead, I said, let's do it when it's cold. So I flew out in the beginning of the year in January, February. It was 10 degrees Celsius out, which is about 50 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. And at nighttime, it dropped down even colder, like into the 40s and maybe high 30s. So I said, let's start the fermentation in the tanks. Then we'll do it at nighttime when it's cool. So we processed the agave. We did the extraction, everything, and got the fermentation going at around 10 degrees, 50 degrees Celsius, and let it go. And it stayed cold. It stayed cold the whole entire time. And then we found out when we did this and when the distillation stuff happened, the flavor profile was so agave intense. It was like drinking Weber Blue Agave, squeezed Weber Blue Agave, cooked agave out of a bottle. It was really great. So that worked. So then we were trying to think of ways, well, how can we do temperature control? And with the big fermentation area they had, they were thinking maybe we'll put air conditioning units in here and try to do that, but that's going to be expensive, power-wise. So they haven't really come up with a way of doing that. And that's going to be one of the problems with trying to incorporate some of the winemaking techniques in the tequila world is it would basically require some retooling of some of the distilleries in order to be able to accomplish that. There is a new distillery that's being built now, and it's going to be like an experimental distillery. It's not going to have a NOM number. It's not going to be making tequila. It'll be making destilado. But they have 2 closed temperature-controlled fermentation tanks that are small, so it'd be good for doing small batches with. I know the gentleman that's building it, and I've talked to him already, and he said, yeah, let's do some experimenting. Let's do some small projects where we can make some stuff doing temperature control. And I'm really excited about that. This is going to be great. And the nice thing is, too, they're small batches, so it's not going to cost a lot of money to do, a huge 400-liter batch. We can just do a small batch and experiment and see what kind of flavor profile we get. And if it works, then we can figure out how we can incorporate it into a bigger distillery. But so far, we've had success in doing that. Now, some of the issues that they have in the tequila world that would make it hard to implement some of the things is most of the tanks that they use for fermenting are open air tanks. They're not closed. There's one distillery I've seen that has closed tanks, but they don't do any temperature control. And I asked them, well, what's the temperature normally like in your fermentation tanks during fermentation? And sometimes it gets up into the high 90s, which is too hot for some yeasts and can cause problems. And they have problems in the summer months with the way the distillate tastes because of pushing the yeast too hard. So, there's another distillery that's being built that's using closed fermentation tanks. And I talked to them and said, maybe we should do something where we can look at doing some temperature control. And they're open to that as well. So that's exciting. But taking some of the wine stuff I'm learning and bringing it over into the tequila world, it's proven to be a little more difficult than I originally thought. But we're trying to work and experiment and try different ways of doing that to create a better quality tequila, more agave focused, less fermentation, off notes, off flavors in it that can expand the flavor profile that way. When you taste tequila, for me, they always talk about wanting to honor the agave, but a lot of them are really rich in fermentation notes and, have some agave in it, where I want to see them more agave focused. And normally what happens when they do agave focused is they'll cut the fermentation short. They won't let it go all the way to the full extent, so it gets a bacteria infection. Instead, they cut it short and then distill it early, 3 or 4 days when it's not really completely dry on the fermentation side of things, which is fine because when a wine yeast takes over a fermentation, or the yeast takes over fermentation, it's producing sulfur dioxide, it's producing heat and carbon dioxide, which makes it very difficult for bacteria to thrive. It's not until after the fermentation happens and the bacteria is able to breathe with air around that the bacteria infection can happen. So if they stop the fermentation while it's fermenting, they'll produce a more agave forward profile, but they'll just get a smaller yield on it than they probably wanted. And then if they let it go dry, in a closed tank situation where it won't get infected, and they'll get more clean agave taste that way versus some of the sour or bitter notes and stuff that can come from outside elements infecting the fermentation. So there you go. There's a lot of similarities between these two, between wine and tequila. For me, I found it fascinating. Hopefully you found it a little fascinating too. If you're a wine person, try experimenting with tequila and don't try Jose Cuervo Gold or any of the stuff you find in the supermarkets. Check out the Tequila Hombre YouTube channel and look at some of the stuff I review and stuff of the stuff I recommend tasting, and sip it. You don't do shots. You lose lime and salt. Sip it. And, what I recommend doing, if you want to explore the terroir aspect, look for one that comes from the Valle or one that comes from Los Altos region. I talk about those in my review video so you'll know which is which. Or if you want to just drop me a note and ask, and say you want to explore the terroir aspects, a good brand for that's Tequila Ocho. They do a lot of stuff with terroir, so you can taste from different regions in the Los Altos region. And then I can give you some Valle tequilas to taste as well, so you can taste the terroir differences. But we sip, neat in a good glass. Like you can even use a wine glass, but something that allows the distillate to breathe. And you'll be amazed at some of the flavor profiles you can pick out just the same way you do with wine. And so in the future, what I'm basically going to be doing is working on trying to bring some of these processes to the world of tequila to help them produce more interesting flavor profiles, different flavor profiles than what people are used to, and kind of try to elevate the flavor profiles a little bit. And hopefully we can do some really cool stuff with it. So hopefully you enjoyed the content in this episode. And as usual, you can find me on YouTube, on the Tequila Hombre channel. You can also comment on the podcasts, on any place you find your podcast, on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, if you have a question, and I'll be more than happy to answer them for you. Or if you want to shoot me a DM on Instagram or Facebook, I always respond personally and would be happy to answer your questions. Hopefully you enjoyed the content and the information provided in this episode. We have lots of great tequila and wine content coming up for you, so make sure you stay subscribed and check out the upcoming episodes. And until next time, like I always say, life is too short to drink bad tequila and wine, so keep following, and we'll guide you and educate you and put you on a path towards really enjoying what's an amazing spirit. Salud. Bye, guys.